Tonight we begin with something Russia never expected Ukraine to find. For decades, Vladimir Putin has relied on a network of hardened underground emergency bunkers built to survive nuclear war, designed to keep the Russian state functioning even if everything above ground is destroyed. These sites are meant to be invisible, untouchable, and above all, safe. Safe from missiles, safe from drones, safe from discovery. But late in 2024, something extraordinary happened. Ukrainian intelligence began noticing patterns that didn't make sense: unusual communications traffic, sudden shifts in security movements, power signatures where none should exist. Piece by piece, signal by signal, a picture started to form. What Russia believed was hidden was no longer hidden. This wasn't speculation. It wasn't a rumor. Ukraine didn't just suspect the location of one of Putin's emergency war bunkers, they located it. And then something even more significant followed. Ukraine didn't announce it. Russia didn't confirm it. State media went quiet. But indicators on the ground told a very different story. Because once that bunker was exposed, it wasn't just a secret that collapsed, it was a myth. The myth that Russia's leadership could operate from places beyond reach. The myth that there were spaces in this war that Ukraine could not touch. Tonight, we're going to explain how Ukraine found Putin's emergency war bunker and why striking it changed far more than a single location. This is RMtalks. Putin's emergency bunkers are not just concrete shelters buried deep underground. They are the backbone of Russia's wartime command structure, the places designed to ensure that power survives even if cities, bases, and ministries do not. These bunkers exist for one purpose: continuity of control. Built during the Cold War and modernized repeatedly since, they are meant to house senior leadership, military commanders, and secure communication systems. From these underground facilities, orders can be issued to troops, missile forces can be coordinated, and the state can project the image that it remains unbroken no matter how severe the crisis above ground. In Russian military doctrine, this matters enormously. The perception of an intact command center reassures allies, deters adversaries, and stabilizes internal power. If leadership can disappear underground and still direct the war, then Russia appears resilient, disciplined, and unshakable. That is why these bunkers are treated as untouchable. Their locations are guarded as state secrets, their existence is rarely acknowledged, and any suggestion that they could be found, let alone targeted, represents more than a military concern. It strikes at the psychology of power itself. Because once an emergency bunker is no longer assumed safe, every decision made inside it becomes clouded by uncertainty, and uncertainty is poison to centralized command. Finding a hardened underground bunker is not about a single breakthrough. It is about patience, correlation, and modern intelligence working in layers. Ukraine's advantage has not been one magic source, but the ability to connect many small signals into one undeniable picture. Satellite imagery plays a role, but not in the obvious way. Analysts don't look for doors or entrances. They track patterns: repeated vehicle movements, construction anomalies, ventilation signatures, unusual power consumption, and infrastructure that doesn't match its surroundings. Underground facilities leave surface footprints even when designed to hide them. Then there is signals intelligence. Secure locations generate secure communications, and secure communications generate traffic. Even encrypted signals reveal timing, volume, and routing. When those patterns change suddenly, intelligence analysts pay attention. Human intelligence fills the gaps. Logistics workers, contractors, regional officials, and local movements all leave traces. Combined with open source data, these details help confirm what technology alone suggests. Ukraine's strength has been fusion blending domestic intelligence with Western-provided analysis without relying on a single point of failure. Russia assumed secrecy meant invisibility. But in the modern battlefield, secrecy without movement discipline becomes exposure. And once exposure happens, the clock starts ticking. By the time Ukrainian analysts reached a high-confidence assessment, the bunker was no longer just a theory, it was a place. Not a pinpoint on a public map, but a geographic context that made strategic sense. The facility was believed to be positioned away from major urban centers, yet close enough to key transportation corridors and secure communications infrastructure to allow rapid command continuity. This balance is critical for emergency bunkers. Hidden, hardened, but operationally connected. What made this bunker more important than others was its role. Analysts assess that this site was not merely a shelter, but an active command node, a location intended for use during escalation, not just nuclear catastrophe. It was designed to coordinate regional military operations and maintain leadership control during high-risk phases of the war. In other words, this was not a relic. It was relevant, staffed, and functional. In the days leading up to the strike, subtle indicators began to align. Communications traffic increased, then abruptly shifted. Security movements intensified around the area, followed by an unusual reduction, a pattern consistent with attempted concealment. Power signatures fluctuated in ways that suggested internal systems cycling or being rerouted. None of these signs alone proved anything. Together, they told a story. Perhaps most telling was Russia's behavior. Convoys altered schedules. Certain command elements appeared to relocate temporarily. Routine messaging cadence changed. These were not panic moves, but they were defensive ones. To intelligence analysts, they looked like the actions of a force that realized something sensitive had been noticed. At that point, the bunker was no longer just located. It was compromised. What followed was not a dramatic, city-shaking explosion, and that's precisely the point. Based on available indicators, the strike appears to have been a standoff precision operation, likely involving a hybrid approach. Long-range systems paired with unmanned platforms. Whether drones, missiles, or a coordinated mix, the defining feature was distance. Ukraine did not need to overfly heavily defended airspace to deliver its message. The method mattered more than the visible damage. This was not about collapsing the bunker or eliminating everyone inside. It was about neutralizing functionality. Analysts believe the strike focused on external dependencies, access points, communications relays, power feeds, and logistical interfaces that connect underground facilities to the surface world. You can harden walls, you can bury command rooms, but no bunker operates in isolation. It needs electricity, airflow, data links, and secure entry routes. Disrupt those, and the bunker becomes a sealed liability rather than a command advantage. In the immediate aftermath, satellite imagery and signals analysis suggested abrupt communication drop-offs consistent with emergency shutdown procedures. Backup systems appeared to activate, then stabilize at reduced capacity. There were no triumphant announcements, only silence, movement, and recalibration. That silence was deliberate. Acknowledging the strike would mean acknowledging vulnerability. Instead, Russia behaved as though nothing had happened while quietly acting as though something very much had. In modern warfare, that contradiction is often the clearest confirmation of impact. There was no official statement confirming the bunker strike, no denial, no detailed rebuttal, just absence. And in intelligence analysis, absence can be louder than words. Russian state media initially avoided the topic entirely, focusing instead on unrelated battlefield updates and international commentary. When indirect references did appear, the language shifted, emphasizing resilience, continuity, and uninterrupted command, phrases that often surface when reassurance is needed most. Analysts noted the timing immediately. Narrative adjustments rarely happen without cause. Behind the scenes, signs of emergency protocols emerged. Communications routing changed. Certain command figures disappeared temporarily from public view. Secure facilities elsewhere showed increased activity, suggesting redistribution of command responsibilities. These are not measures taken lightly. They indicate precaution, and precaution implies concern. Why does silence matter so much? Because Russia has a long history of rapid, forceful denial when accusations are false. When something doesn't happen, the response is often loud. When something does happen, especially something sensitive, the response is measured, delayed, or non-existent. From an intelligence perspective, this pattern is well understood. Silence limits confirmation. It buys time. It prevents adversaries from assessing success. But it also signals that there is something worth hiding. In this case, Russia's refusal to openly address the incident did not erase it. It amplified it. Among analysts, silence functioned as indirect validation, a recognition that a line had been crossed, even if no one was willing to say so aloud. And once that silence settled in, one reality became clear. The illusion of untouchable space had been broken. For Vladimir Putin personally, the exposure of an emergency bunker cuts far deeper than any tactical loss. These facilities are not just military assets, they are symbols of control, foresight, and personal security. The assumption that there is always a safe place to retreat to is central to how authoritarian power is exercised. When that assumption cracks, so does confidence. Inside the Kremlin, trust is everything, and trust is fragile. An operation like this inevitably triggers quiet questions. Who talked? Who failed? Who knew? Even if no single breach occurred, suspicion spreads. Intelligence officers question security protocols. Military commanders reassess what they can safely communicate. The result is friction inside a system that depends on centralized loyalty and obedience. More damaging still is the psychological shift from protected to exposed. If one bunker can be located, then none can be fully trusted. That fear forces leaders to constantly reassess their surroundings, their routines, and their own safety. It narrows decision-making and encourages risk aversion, a dangerous condition during an active war. History offers brief parallels. During World War II, Allied breakthroughs against German command infrastructure didn't always destroy leadership physically, but they eroded confidence, increased paranoia, and slowed responses. In the Cold War, both sides understood that survivability depended as much on perception as on concrete. This moment echoes that lesson. The bunker strike didn't need to eliminate leadership to succeed. It needed only to prove that protection was conditional, not absolute. And once fear enters the command environment, it doesn't stay contained. It reshapes how power is exercised and how boldly decisions are made. The military impact of this operation extends well beyond a single underground site. At its core, it disrupted command and control, the invisible nervous system of any modern military. When a key node is compromised, even temporarily, orders slow, confirmations lag, and coordination suffers. One immediate consequence is forced relocation. Command elements must move, duplicate systems must be activated, and new security arrangements must be put in place. All of this takes time. And time in warfare is opportunity often for the other side. Decision-making becomes cautious, layered with additional checks, and slowed by uncertainty about communication security. There is also a significant resource cost. Protecting underground infrastructure is expensive. Once vulnerabilities are exposed, Russia must divert manpower, air defenses, surveillance assets, and engineering resources to secure sites that were previously assumed safe. That protection comes at the expense of frontline needs. Every unit guarding a bunker is a unit not reinforcing a battlefield position. Every air defense system protecting leadership infrastructure is one not protecting logistics or troop concentrations. Over time, this redistribution weakens operational flexibility. Perhaps most critically, the psychological disruption feeds back into military effectiveness. Commanders hesitate. Field units wait longer for authorization. Initiative narrows. Ukraine, by contrast, benefits from speed and adaptability. This is how asymmetric pressure works. You don't need to defeat an army everywhere. You only need to strain its ability to function smoothly. By forcing Russia to protect what it once took for granted, Ukraine has imposed a constant, draining burden, one that quietly degrades battlefield performance day after day. Did Ukraine cross a red line, or did it expose one that never truly existed? That question now sits at the center of strategic debate. For years, Russia has signaled that certain actions would trigger severe retaliation. Strikes deep inside Russian territory, attacks on leadership infrastructure, or threats to regime stability. These warnings were designed to deter escalation by projecting resolve. But deterrence only works if it is credible. In this case, Russia's response options were limited. A dramatic escalation risks drawing NATO further in. A muted response risks signaling weakness. Doing nothing avoids immediate escalation but invites repetition. Each option carries cost. Ukraine appears to have calculated this carefully. The strike was calibrated, precise, deniable, and focused on functionality rather than mass casualties. That restraint narrowed Russia's ability to justify a disproportionate response while still delivering a strategic message. NATO is watching closely, not for spectacle, but for reaction. Alliance analysts study what Russia chooses not to do as much as what it does. Does Moscow escalate? Does it absorb the blow? Does it quietly adapt? So far, the pattern suggests restraint. And restraint implies that the red line was less firm than advertised. This matters beyond Ukraine. If threats are shown to be flexible rather than absolute, future deterrence calculations change not just in Europe, but globally. The bunker strike may ultimately be remembered not as an escalation, but as a revelation that power projected through warnings is only as strong as the response that follows. What this operation ultimately signals is a decisive shift in how wars are fought and won. For much of modern history, military power was measured by mass. More troops, more tanks, deeper bunkers, thicker walls. But this moment underscores a different reality. Intelligence dominance now outweighs brute force. Ukraine did not overpower Russia's defenses. It outfought them. By integrating satellite data, signals intelligence, human sources, and behavioral analysis, Ukraine demonstrated that awareness, not firepower, is the most decisive advantage on today's battlefield. When you can see the system clearly, you don't need to destroy every part of it. You only need to disrupt the right ones. The strike also dismantles a long-standing assumption that underground equals invulnerable. Hardened facilities were designed for a world where detection was limited and attribution was slow. That world no longer exists. Persistent surveillance, pattern analysis, and data fusion mean that concealment is temporary at best. Depth buys time, not safety. Equally striking is the imbalance between cost and effect. Ukraine used relatively inexpensive technology to neutralize assets worth billions. Cheap drones, open-source intelligence, and adaptable platforms defeated secrecy built at extraordinary expense. That asymmetry terrifies military planners. It suggests that even the most well-funded defense establishments are vulnerable to creative, agile opponents. This is why militaries around the world are paying close attention, not because a bunker was struck, but because a principle was proven. If leadership spaces can be identified, mapped, and pressured without massive escalation, then no command structure can assume sanctuary. In modern warfare, dominance belongs to those who can see first, decide faster, and act precisely. And that reality is forcing a global rethink of what security truly means. The implications of this operation ripple far beyond Ukraine and Russia. In Beijing, analysts are studying the lesson carefully. China has invested heavily in hardened command infrastructure, redundancy, and underground facilities. What Ukraine demonstrated is that survivability is no longer about thickness of concrete, but about exposure management. That lesson applies directly to any future high-intensity conflict. NATO, meanwhile, is drawing different conclusions. Alliance planners see confirmation that decentralized command, mobility, and redundancy outperform static fortification. This reinforces existing doctrinal shifts toward dispersed leadership, flexible decision-making, and rapid reconstitution of command nodes under pressure. Iran is watching as well. Its reliance on hidden facilities, proxy coordination hubs, and hardened sites mirrors many of the assumptions now under scrutiny. The idea that secrecy alone provides protection has been fundamentally weakened. Across all these actors, one trend is emerging: a reevaluation of hardened infrastructure. The emphasis is shifting away from impregnable sites and toward deception, mobility, and redundancy. Multiple temporary command nodes, rotating leadership presence, and deliberately misleading signatures are becoming more valuable than permanent bunkers. Perhaps the most profound shift is psychological. The era of untouchable leadership spaces is ending. No office, bunker, or underground complex can be assumed safe indefinitely. That forces leaders to plan not just for survival, but for exposure. In strategic terms, this marks a transition. Power is no longer projected by hiding perfectly. It is projected by adapting faster than your adversary can observe. And that change is quietly reshaping military planning worldwide. At its core, this story is not about a bunker. It is about a belief, and the moment that belief collapsed. For years, Putin's emergency bunkers represented certainty. Certainty of control, certainty of survival, certainty that some spaces remained beyond reach. That certainty is now gone. The myth of absolute protection has been shattered, not by overwhelming force, but by precision, patience, and perception. Ukraine's message was unmistakable. This was not an attempt to decapitate leadership or provoke uncontrolled escalation. It was a demonstration, a controlled exposure designed to show capability without excess. A signal that secrecy can be penetrated, that assumptions can be overturned, and that even the most protected systems are subject to scrutiny. Importantly, this wasn't about destruction. The physical damage mattered less than the strategic effect. By revealing that the bunker could be found and pressured, Ukraine altered calculations inside the Kremlin and beyond. Every future decision must now account for vulnerability where there was once confidence. This is the deeper lesson of modern warfare. Victory does not always come from obliteration. Sometimes it comes from illumination, from forcing an adversary to confront what they assumed would remain hidden. And that is why this moment matters. Because in modern war, the most dangerous weapon isn't the missile, it's being seen.